Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been digging into all these sources about societies that have collapsed, and
Yeah.
well, it's both fascinating and a little, I don't know, unsettling.
Right.
So today, we're going to do a deep dive into all that, try to understand what went wrong.
Yeah, like what are the common threads?
Yeah.
You know, were there warning signs that these societies just totally missed?
And I think the biggest question is what can we learn from their fates? Because, it's kind of a mirror to ourselves, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think the thing that's so fascinating about studying these collapses is that, well, they happened centuries ago, but they still offer this really powerful lens for us to examine the challenges that we face today.
Yeah.
Like holding a mirror up to our own society and asking, could this happen to us?
It's a scary thought, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we're going to be focusing mainly on Jared Diamond's book, Collapse, which, goes really deep into this very question. He examines a bunch of different societies, from the Greenland Norse to the Easter Islanders, the Maya and the Anasazi,
Right.
to understand, why some societies thrive while others fall apart. And one of the most striking examples he uses, I think, is this comparison of two farms.
Yes.
One, like a modern, successful, thriving farm in Montana,
Right.
and the other one, an abandoned farmstead in North Greenland, deserted, over 500 years ago?
Yeah, it's crazy. And both of these societies, at their peak, they probably felt invincible, much like we do today.
Oh, absolutely. It's hard to imagine, a society like the United States just disappearing. So
Hmm.
what makes that difference between, resilience and collapse?
That's the big question, right?
Yeah.
And Diamond, he identifies 5 kind of interconnected factors
Okay.
that really contribute to these societal collapses. And these factors, they can act, independently.
Yeah.
But more often, they kind of intertwine and
Mm.
create this perfect storm of challenges.
Okay, let's break those down. What's the first one?
So the first one is environmental damage.
Okay.
And often this really serves as a catalyst for even more problems. So think, deforestation, soil erosion, or, the buildup of salt in farmland, which is called salinization.
Right.
These issues can really cripple a society's ability to produce food and resources.
And we're seeing, those same environmental issues today. That's pretty relevant, right?
Well, absolutely.
So what's the second factor?
The second factor is climate change. And while it's often framed as this modern problem,
Yeah.
shifts in climate have always played a really significant role in shaping societal uh, trajectories.
Mhm.
And often it just amplifies, those stresses that are already there.
So a society might be able to handle one problem, but
Yeah.
throw in a changing climate and things
Yeah.
can get really messy really fast.
Exactly.
So what are the other factors?
All right. So the next two, they really focus on society's relationships with others.
Okay.
So first, you've got the relationship with friendly societies,
Okay.
which centers around trade and interdependence. So imagine relying really heavily on another society for essential resources like food or, materials for building, and then all of a sudden that relationship collapses.
Mm.
It could be devastating.
It's like putting all your eggs in one basket. What about hostile neighbors?
Yeah, that's the fourth factor.
Yeah.
Conflict and competition over land, resources, and power. It's been a major disruptor throughout history, right?
Oh, yeah. Conflict seems like an unfortunate constant in the human story.
Yeah, pretty much.
So we've got environmental damage, climate change, and relationships with other societies,
Mm.
both friendly and, well, not so friendly. What's the fifth, the final factor?
It all comes down to societal responses. So how a society chooses to react or not react to these environmental, social, or political challenges, that can determine its fate.
Right.
So you could have the same problem. It could be a minor setback for one society and a death knell for another.
Makes sense.
It all depends on their choices.
Totally. Well, let's dive into some specific examples to kind of see how these factors play out in real world scenarios. What about Easter Island?
Yeah, Easter
Those massive statues, right?
Mhm.
They're iconic, and the story of their civilization's collapse it's pretty intriguing.
Yeah.
What exactly happened there?
So Easter Island is a classic example of how environmental damage can spiral out of control. What many people don't realize is that the island was once covered in these lush palm forests. It was a completely different landscape than the barren one we see today.
Wow, it's hard to imagine those iconic statues, surrounded by these dense forests.
Right.
So how did they contribute to the island's downfall? Weren't they religious symbols?
Yeah, they were. But they also became entangled with this really intense social competition. So you had different clans on the island trying to like outdo each other, building bigger and more elaborate statues. And well, this required massive amounts of timber and resources.
Hmm.
And the problem is they seemed to miss, or maybe just chose to ignore, the long-term consequences of their actions.
It's almost like they were like trapped in this cycle of one-upmanship, each
Mhm.
clan trying to, I don't know, prove their dominance even as they were, like depleting their own island's resources.
Yeah.
It's a reminder of how, ambition and short-term thinking can have these devastating consequences.
Yeah, and Diamond, he frames this perfectly. He asks this thought-provoking question. What did the Easter Islander who cut down the last palm tree say while he was doing it?
Wow.
It forces us to really consider how individuals and societies can be blinded to the long-term impacts of their choices.
Yeah. That's a chilling thought. And, the evidence from pollen records and charcoal remains and even like rat gnawed palm nuts found on Easter Island,
Mhm.
it just paints this clear picture of how drastically the environment changed. But how did they even get to that point? Were there any warning signs? Like, did they just miss them?
Well, that's where the psychological and social factors come in.
Right.
We have to consider the potential belief systems that
Yeah.
might have hindered their ability to see the consequences of their actions. Like, did their social structure actually, incentivize unsustainable practices?
That's a good point. Let's shift gears a bit. Let's
Yes.
look at another society that vanished. The Greenland Norse.
Yeah.
What can their story teach us about these factors that contribute to collapse?
So the Greenland Norse, they faced this brutal environment, like from the start.
Mm.
Their survival depended on, well, raising livestock, hunting, and maintaining trade routes with Europe.
Mm.
But their story really highlights how even these successful adaptations, they could be undone by a changing climate.
So they were already living on a knife's edge.
Yeah.
And then climate change threw, another wrench in the works. So what happened?
The little ice age hit,
Okay.
and it just made an already challenging environment, even more difficult.
Hmm.
It's crucial to understand the specific climatic shifts that were involved here. Temperatures dropped, growing seasons are shortened, and the sea ice, it expanded,
Uh-huh.
and it just impacted their ability to farm, hunt, and trade.
It sounds like this cascade of challenges, like
Yeah.
one right on top of the other.
Yeah.
How did they respond to that?
So their cultural identity played a significant role in their response.
Yeah.
And, well, it probably contributed to their downfall.
Really?
Yeah, they clung to their European traditions,
Mhm.
like their reliance on cattle, even when those traditions became unsustainable, in the face of this changing climate.
So even though they were living in Greenland,
Yeah.
their identity as Europeans, it still influenced their choices, even when those choices became, well, detrimental to their survival.
Exactly. They seem to prioritize maintaining their cultural identity over, like, actually adapting to the realities of their environment.
Mm.
And, this contrasts really sharply with the Inuit,
Mm.
who thrived in that same challenging environment.
Yeah, that's a powerful reminder that, our values and beliefs, they really can shape our responses to these challenges.
Yeah.
And sometimes those values can become liabilities in a changing world.
Okay.
Now, let's move on to a society that was a bit closer to home for us.
Okay.
The Anasazi. They built those amazing cliff dwellings in Chaco Canyon, right?
Yeah, they did. The Anasazi, they developed this sophisticated society
Yeah.
and this intricate understanding of their environment,
Mhm.
particularly water management.
Mm-hmm.
And their story is, it's a reminder that even societies with advanced knowledge in these complex systems, they can be incredibly vulnerable to environmental changes and social pressures.
So what led to their, like, seemingly sudden downfall? They seem to have it all figured out,
Right. Well, it's a complex story, but a key factor was their dependence on a fragile environment.
Okay.
You see, they relied on this really complex network
Yeah.
of water management and resource sharing,
Right.
which worked well for a time.
Yeah.
But as their population grew and then a prolonged drought hit, well, their intricate systems were just pushed to their limits.
So their story kind of echoes those of the Easter Islanders and the Greenland Norse,
Hmm.
where environmental pressures combine with, societal choices to
Hmm.
could create this recipe for disaster. So we've got these compelling case studies, right? Each
Hmm.
illustrating different aspects of societal collapse.
Right.
It makes you wonder, why do societies fail to solve these problems even when the warning signs are like flashing red, you know?
It's a good question.
It's almost like there's this disconnect between seeing a problem and actually taking the steps to solve it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you mentioned rational bad behavior earlier.
Hmm.
Can you explain what that is
Yeah.
and how does that play into societal collapse?
Sure. Yeah. So, rational bad behavior, it describes those situations where individuals or groups, they make decisions that seem totally logical in the short term,
Uh-huh.
but they end up harming, like, the collective good.
Okay.
It's kind of like the tragedy of the commons in action.
Yeah.
A classic example is overfishing. So each individual fisherman might think, well, if I catch just a few extra fish, it's not going to make a big difference.
Right.
But if everyone acts that way, well, the whole fishery collapses
Yeah.
and everyone is harmed in the long run.
It's like that collective, I don't know, short-sightedness.
Yeah.
Everyone prioritizing their own needs over the long-term sustainability of the resource. What are some other reasons, though, that societies might fail to, to act even when they know there's a problem?
Well, another big factor is clashes of interest,
Okay.
often between like elites and the masses,
Mm.
or between those who um, prioritize short-term gains over long-term sustainability.
Okay.
Think about it.
Yeah.
Those in power, they might resist making changes that threaten their wealth or their status,
Right.
even if those changes would benefit, society as a whole in the long run.
Yeah, it's like that saying, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Hmm.
But it's not just about, powerful individuals, is it? It seems like entire societies can get caught in these patterns of like short-sighted thinking.
Oh, absolutely. And then there's the psychological factor of denial.
Right.
It's a very human tendency to downplay or ignore these unpleasant realities, even when, like, the evidence is staring us right in the face.
Yeah.
And on a societal level, well, this can lead to inaction and a failure to address, these critical problems.
Denial's a powerful force, that's for sure. But despite, these rather, I guess, bleak patterns, there must have been societies that managed to avoid collapse, right?
Yeah.
What can we learn from those who found ways to like navigate these challenges?
So you're right. There are actually many examples of societies that have shown remarkable resilience and ingenuity in the face of, all these environmental and social pressures.
Okay.
One fascinating case is the people of Tikopia.
Okay.
It's a small Polynesian island that has managed to, like, survive for over 3,000 years
Wow.
on very limited resources.
Tikopia, I've never even heard of them. What's their secret?
Well, they developed this remarkably sustainable system based on what we call a bottom-up approach to problem solving.
Okay.
So in a bottom-up approach, change kind of emerges from the collective actions and decisions of the community.
Mm-hmm.
There's no central authority like
Yeah.
dictating all the rules.
Gotcha.
Instead, there's this shared understanding of the island's limited resources and a collective responsibility to, well, manage them carefully.
So it's like a grassroots approach to sustainability. Everyone working together for the common good.
Exactly, yeah.
Fascinating. Did they have any like specific practices that contributed to their long-term survival?
So they practiced a highly efficient form of agriculture.
Uh-huh.
They carefully rotated crops
Okay.
and managed soil fertility.
Uh-huh.
They also made these conscious decisions to limit their population growth
Wow.
to avoid, like, overtaxing their resources.
Yeah.
And their story, I mean, it's a testament to the power of collective action
Yeah.
and a deep understanding of, well, the interconnectedness of humans and the environment.
Wow, that's incredibly forward-thinking, especially considering this was like centuries ago. It's such a stark contrast to the Easter Islanders
Right.
who, well, they seem to be caught in that spiral of competition that ultimately led to, their downfall. Are there other examples of societies that found like different paths to sustainability?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's look at Tokugawa, Japan,
Okay.
which offers an interesting contrast to Tikopia's bottom-up approach.
Okay.
So in the 17th century, Japan faced this growing environmental crisis.
Mm-hmm.
due to, well, deforestation.
Okay.
They'd emerged from this period of like really intense warfare,
Right.
and their population and their economy were booming.
Okay.
And timber was in high demand for, well, everything. Construction, shipbuilding, I mean, you name it.
So they were essentially like devouring their own forests.
Yeah, pretty much.
So what did they do? Did they follow like Tecopia's lead and adopt a bottom-up approach?
Not exactly. Tokugawa Japan provides a great example of what we call a top-down approach.
Okay.
So the Tokugawa shogunate, which was the ruling government at the time,
Yeah.
they stepped in with a series of like really radical policies to address this deforestation crisis. They implemented strict regulations on logging.
Okay.
They established a really sophisticated system of forest management.
Wow.
And they even encouraged the use of alternative materials like bamboo.
So instead of relying on like collective action, they had this centralized authority
Right.
taking charge and enforcing these sustainable practices. It sounds, I don't know, almost authoritarian, but I guess in a crisis, I mean, drastic measures are necessary sometimes.
Yeah, that's a great point. And there are definitely different perspectives on, the Tokugawa shogunate's methods.
Yeah. Okay.
Some people argue that their top-down approach, well, it was necessary to actually avert an ecological disaster.
Okay.
Others point out that it relied really heavily on centralized control.
Right.
And might not be applicable in, all situations.
So it's a good reminder that there's no like one-size-fits-all solution to these environmental challenges.
Yeah.
The most effective approach might really depend on a society's specific circumstances, their cultural values, and their political structures.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the key takeaway from both Tokopia and Tokugawa Japan, is that societies are capable of making dramatic changes when faced with environmental crises, whether it's through collective action or government intervention. I mean, there are paths to sustainability. Now, those are societies that succeeded, but there are also cases where things didn't go so well, even when societies shared similar, environmental challenges.
I am all ears. Give me an example.
Okay. So let's look at the island of Hispaniola,
Okay.
shared by the Dominican Republic and Haiti.
Right.
They offer this fascinating comparison of how different responses to like similar environmental pressures, well, they can lead to dramatically different outcomes. So Haiti, for a variety of complex reasons, faced this downward spiral of deforestation, soil erosion, and political instability.
Oh, wow. So they were hit with like a perfect storm of challenges.
Yeah.
What about the Dominican Republic? Did they face like similar issues?
They did. I mean, they shared the same island.
Right.
But in contrast to Haiti, the Dominican Republic, they took a more proactive approach to environmental management.
Okay.
So they established national parks, protected forests, and even implemented programs to like replant trees.
So they recognize the importance of environmental protection. What factors allowed them to like take those steps though while Haiti struggled?
Well, leadership played a crucial role.
Okay.
In the Dominican Republic, this leader named Joaquin Balaguer emerged.
Okay.
And he made conservation a real priority. He understood that protecting forests and watersheds, I mean, it wasn't just about saving trees.
Right.
It was about ensuring like the long-term economic and social stability of the Dominican Republic.
It's interesting that a single leader could like make such a difference.
Yeah.
What were his motivations? Was he like a true environmentalist?
Well, his motives were complex.
Okay.
And historians, I mean, they debate them to this day.
Right.
Some people believe his environmental policies were partly driven by a desire to like bolster his political image, while others argue he was genuinely concerned about the long-term well-being of the country.
Yeah.
But regardless of his motivations, there's no denying that his actions had this lasting positive impact on the Dominican Republic's environment.
It's a reminder that progress can come from these unexpected places.
Yeah.
And that even, imperfect leaders can make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, you mentioned earlier that sometimes a society's strengths can also become its weaknesses. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, so that's what Diamond calls the paradox of success.
Okay.
It's the idea that sometimes the very things that contribute to a society's success, like its values, institutions, or even its technologies,
right,
they can become obstacles to adaptation.
Okay.
When circumstances change. It's like, you're driving a car and you refuse to change gears, even when the road conditions demand it.
Okay. Yeah. So you're successful for a while, but
Yeah.
you eventually hit a point where you need to adapt
Yeah.
or you're going to crash.
Right.
Can you give me an example of how this played out in a real society?
Let's look at Australia.
Okay.
So when Europeans colonized Australia,
Mm-hmm.
they brought with them this worldview
Okay.
and a set of practices that were like deeply rooted in a European context.
Yeah.
They saw the land as something to be tamed and exploited. And their agricultural practices,
Right.
which worked perfectly fine in Europe,
Yeah.
well, they proved disastrous
Okay.
in Australia's more fragile ecosystem.
It's like trying to force a square peg into a round hole. What were the consequences of this mismatch?
Well, the results were significant.
Yeah.
Deforestation, soil erosion,
Mm-hmm.
and the introduction of non-native species like
Yeah.
rabbits and foxes
Okay.
just wreaked havoc on these native ecosystems.
Okay.
Like rabbits, for example. They reproduced like crazy
Yeah.
and just decimated native vegetation.
Rabbits. Seriously. Those fluffy little bunnies.
I know, it sounds kind of comical.
Yeah.
But their introduction had this cascade of negative impacts.
Yeah.
So they outcompeted native animals for resources,
Yeah.
and they contributed to, well, soil erosion. It's a classic example of how a seemingly harmless action can have these unintended and really devastating consequences.
Right. It highlights the importance of, understanding the delicate balance of ecosystems and considering the long-term impacts of our choices. So we've explored a lot of ground here, from societies that collapsed to those that found ways to thrive in the face of challenges. But it seems like there's like a bigger question looming. What does all of this mean for us today? I mean, are we doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past?
I mean, it's a question a lot of people are asking.
I mean, it can feel a little overwhelming,
Yeah.
when we see similar patterns playing out today, like climate change, deforestation, overfishing, and all that. Like, I don't know, are we just stuck in this cycle of repeating history's mistakes?
That's the question that keeps a lot of people up at night.
Yeah.
But I believe that understanding these patterns of collapse, I mean, rather than leading to despair, it can actually empower us to make more informed decisions. We're not just passively observing these trends.
Yeah.
We have the capacity to learn from them and chart a different course.
So you're saying like knowledge is power.
Yeah, exactly.
Give me some reasons to be, I don't know, optimistic. What sets us apart from those societies that collapsed?
Well, for starters, we have a huge advantage that past societies didn't have.
Oh, okay.
We have this wealth of scientific knowledge and historical data. We have a deeper understanding of, well, how our planet works,
Huh?
the interconnectedness of ecosystems, the potential consequences of our actions. Think about it. We can look back thousands of years and see how societies responded to similar challenges. What worked, what didn't.
Mm-hmm.
That's an incredible resource.
Yeah. It's like having a cheat sheet for civilization.
Exactly.
We can learn from their successes and their failures, but knowledge alone doesn't guarantee success, does it?
You're right. You're right. It's not enough to just know what the problems are. We need to
Yeah.
actually act on that knowledge. And that's where I think another reason for optimism comes in, technology.
Okay.
We have tools and innovations at our disposal that past societies couldn't even dream of.
Yeah.
Renewable energy sources, sustainable agricultural practices, more efficient transportation systems. These are just a few examples.
Yeah, it's amazing to think how far we've come technologically, but sometimes it feels like technology creates as many problems as it solves, I mean, look at the impact of social media on our attention spans.
Right.
Or the rise of all this misinformation.
Yeah, that's a valid concern. Technology it's a double-edged sword, right?
Mm-hmm.
It can be this powerful tool for positive change, but it can also amplify, these existing problems if we're not careful. It's up to us to ensure that we're using technology wisely and ethically with a focus on long-term sustainability rather than just, short-term gains.
So we've got knowledge and technology. What else do we need to kind of break free from these cycles of collapse?
Here's the key ingredient,
Yeah.
a shift in mindset.
Okay.
We need to move away from that short-term, self-interested thinking that has driven so many societies to ruin.
Yeah.
We need to start thinking about the long-term consequences of our actions, prioritizing the well-being of the planet in future generations.
That makes sense. It's about shifting from a me mentality to a we mentality, recognizing that we're all interconnected. But that sounds like like a massive undertaking. How do we even like begin to shift the mindset of an entire society, let alone the world?
It's a big challenge, no doubt.
Yeah.
But I believe it starts with individual actions.
Okay.
Each one of us has the power to make choices that align with our values.
Mhm.
You know, whether it's reducing our carbon footprint, supporting sustainable businesses, or advocating for policies that promote environmental protection and social justice.
So it's like that ripple effect, right?
Mhm.
Small individual actions can create these larger waves of change. But, let's be realistic. These problems are complex and global.
Yeah.
It's easy to feel like our individual actions don't really matter in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, that feeling of powerlessness is something we all grapple with at times.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember that individual actions, when multiplied across, millions of people,
Yeah.
they can have a profound impact. Think about movements like the fight for civil rights
Hmm.
or the push for gender equality. I mean, those changes, they didn't happen overnight,
Mm-hmm.
but they started with individuals speaking up, demanding change, and inspiring others to join the cause.
So it's about finding our own spheres of influence,
Exactly.
whether it's, within our families or communities or our workplaces, and just taking action where we can.
Yeah.
But let's not forget about the role of governments and institutions. I mean, they have this huge responsibility
Mm-hmm.
to create policies and regulations that promote sustainability and protect the environment.
Absolutely. Individual actions are essential, but they need to be supported by systemic changes.
Right.
We need governments that prioritize long-term well-being over short-term political gains.
Yeah.
Businesses that embrace sustainable practices
Mm.
and international cooperation to address these global challenges like climate change.
So it sounds like we need this multi-pronged approach.
Yeah.
Individuals making conscious choices,
Yeah.
businesses adopting sustainable practices,
Mm.
and governments creating policies that promote long-term well-being.
Yep. Exactly.
But are there any like specific lessons that we can learn from those past societies that successfully, navigated these environmental challenges?
One key lesson that really emerges is the importance of adaptability and innovation.
Okay.
Societies that have been able to shift their practices, embrace new technologies, and kind of reevaluate their values in response to changing circumstances, well, they've been more likely to survive and thrive. Take the Icelanders, for example. They faced volcanic eruptions, climate fluctuations, and economic hardships over the centuries,
Right.
and yet they found ways to adapt, innovate, and maintain their cultural identity.
It reminds us that humans are incredibly resilient and resourceful when we put our minds to it.
Mhm.
It gives me, I don't know, hope that we can overcome the challenges that we face today. What other lessons can we draw from those who succeeded?
Another crucial factor is the willingness to prioritize long-term well-being over short-term gains. The Tokugawa shogunate's forest management policies are a prime example. They understood that sacrificing some, immediate economic benefits for the sake of long-term sustainability, well, it was essential for their society's survival.
It's about shifting from a mindset of scarcity and competition
Yeah.
to one of abundance and cooperation.
Right.
Recognizing that we're all in this together.
Exactly. And finally, it's crucial to remember that we're not starting from scratch,
Right.
There are countless individuals, organizations, and communities around the world who are already working towards a more sustainable future.
Yeah.
They're developing renewable energy technologies, promoting sustainable agriculture, protecting ecosystems, and advocating for social justice.
So it's about connecting with those change makers,
Yeah.
supporting their efforts,
Yeah.
and amplifying their voices.
Exactly. Change happens from the bottom up, and it's powered by collective action. Each one of us has the power to make a difference, whether it's through the choices we make in our daily lives, the work we do, or the causes we support. It all adds up.
It's inspiring to see how many people are already working to create a better future. So as we wrap up this deep dive into societal collapses, I want to leave our listeners with a final thought-provoking question. Knowing what we know about the past, what steps can we take individually and collectively to ensure a more sustainable future for ourselves and generations to come?
That's the question we all need to be asking ourselves, right?
Yeah.
It's a question that deserves careful consideration and ongoing dialogue. The answers won't be easy, but they're essential if we want to create a world where both humanity and the planet can thrive.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope this episode has sparked some reflection
Yeah.
and inspired you to join the conversation about building a more sustainable future. Until next time.